Hi everyone, it's David. In this episode of Pod Save the Youth, my guest and I discuss the ongoing crisis of American gun violence, 2 years after the Uvalde school shooting. We recorded this episode a few days ago, and since then, Donald Trump made a speech at the NRA convention in Texas, where he promised to, if elected in November, roll back the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act to allow domestic abusers, teenagers, and those with severe mental health conditions to have easy access to weapons of war. This year alone, there have been over 100 mass shootings in the United States, and the impact of gun violence disproportionately impacts youth and communities of color. I say this not out of pessimism, but simply to preface the progress that we discuss in today's episode by reminding all of our listeners that no matter what your feelings are on the two candidates in this race, it is all on the ballot this November. Today, our hearts go out to all the families who have lost loved ones to gun violence. I hope that you find today's conversation informative and empowering. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pod Save the Youth. My name is David Seaton. I'm your host. And today we'll be talking all about the issue of gun violence in the United States, 2 years in the wake of the Uvalde school shooting. And we're so excited to be welcoming a wonderful guest to the show today. Emma, would you like to give a brief introduction?
Yeah, hi. My name is Emma Shultz, and I am the founder of GenZCrusade, an organization dedicated to ending gun violence in America. I started GenZCrusade 2 years ago during my sophomore year of high school. Yes, I'm a senior in high school now. I'm old. Um, but yeah, I started GenZCrusade 2 years ago, right after the Uvalde shooting, because I was tired of my voice not being heard. We see that, you know, these politicians get to make decisions about our lives and we get to, face the fallout. And I was sick and tired of it. At the time, I couldn't vote. And so I decided to do the I could do, which was use my voice. And that's how Gen Z Crusade started.
Yeah, well, Emma, we are so excited to welcome you onto the show today to commemorate something that is truly a tragedy for young people and people across the United States, the anniversary of the Uvalde school shooting, where 19 students and 2 teachers were brutally murdered in Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, in 2022. This shooting brought to a lot of young people's attention the issue of gun violence in a new way. And as we know that this trend of school shootings in the United States is nothing unique to Uvalde. The Uvalde school shooting was the 212th mass shooting in 2022. So Emma, I'm wondering what stood out to you about the Uvalde school shooting and why do you think it drew as much attention to the issue of gun violence as it did?
Yeah, I mean, as we know that in 2022, 212 mass shootings happened. And, Uvalde drew much more attention than any of the other shootings. And I think what really stood out was, you know, the young age of the students that were affected by gun violence, right? We had elementary school students being brutally murdered at school, a place where they were supposed to go to learn, a place where they were about to grad or go on to the next grade from, culminate from their original grade. And I think that, you know, I was shook by the Parkland shooting when it happened. I was in 7th grade when that happened. And I think that, the Uvalde shooting brought up all those feelings and all of those memories, and even though the kids at school were much younger. And I think the world and the people in the United States got the same sentiment that, something really needs to change. These kids have no say over what's going on. They have no say about the politics, yet they're the ones being brutally murdered as a result of the ineffectiveness of our political officials.
Yeah, well said. And in response to this ineffectiveness by the political officials, Emma, you organized a school walkout at your high school. Uh, and what kind of barriers or challenges did you face in organizing this in the wake of the shooting with regards to school administration and teachers?
Yeah, so I tried to organize a walkout and the school administration kind of blocked it and said that they didn't want us to interfere with class. And so we did kind of like a mock walkout. I didn't want to completely define my school because I'm from a very liberal part of California. Most of California is pretty liberal, but especially the area that I'm from. And so most of the school administration agreed with me, most of the teachers agreed with me. And so I think we both agreed that a walkout may not send the message that we wanted to send. It might be a little bit more disruptive. So we did a mock walkout where we organized a protest um, or a rally during lunch, and we just gave speeches and we, kind of taught people about what's going on and kind of empowered them about how they can do something. Because I think we often say, I want to speak up, but we don't say how you can speak up. And I think the protest, the rally was really to motivate our peers to speak up. And we wanted the most amount of people to hear what we were saying. And so we posted on TikTok. And one of my speeches, the speech that this quote went viral, I said, you need to ban assault rifles, not books. You need to regulate firearms, not our bodies. You need to protect kids, not the NRA. You have the power to protect us, so why won't you? And I think that, speaks volumes about what our protest was about. It wasn't about being disruptive. It wasn't about walking out. It was about inspiring other people to speak out against our politicians and say, you need to protect us. Why aren't you protecting us? And we really wanted to empower our peers. And I think we did. And it was a beautiful way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'm also wondering, how did you figure out like what politicians you wanted to target? Because I know there are people who are easy to blame for shootings like the one at Uvalde, like Greg Abbott or like Ted Cruz, but as we know, they're probably not going to be the ones that are able to or want to change on this issue to support something substantial in regards to like a policy that would actually prevent one of these shootings from happening in the future. So how did you target your audience for um, your activism?
Right. I mean, you're so right that a lot of the people that, were open to the idea of students protesting were people who already support us. Unlike, Mitch McConnell, Greg Abbott, Ted Cruz. And I think the problem right now is that these people don't want to listen to us because they don't have to. And I think we identified that during our protests, and that's why we started our campaign of registering voters because these people aren't listening to us again because they don't have to. They're going to be elected anyway, whether they, pass gun violence legislation and whether they don't. And so I think we decided that, we need to register more voters so that we can vote these people out because they've consistently showed us that they're not going to listen to us. So we're going to vote them out and we're going to register voters to achieve that goal.
100%. Yeah. I mean, if you can't make them change, you have to replace them. That's how politics works. And it's absolutely what youth should be pushing for across the country. Well, we saw in the wake of the Uvalde shooting, a lot of young people rise up and demand that their politicians take action across the country. The Uvalde families who were affected by the shooting also protested and also contributed in their own way to trying to make change on this issue. We saw that some of the early stages of the protests from the Uvalde families resulted in the firing of the incident commander at the school, who was Pete Arredondo, the school district police chief for Uvalde, who kept roughly 376 law enforcement officers from entering the building during the shooting, possibly causing numerous deaths of students. So the families were absolutely important in getting him fired. We saw that these same families, when they went to their state legislators, their state officials who were supposed to heed their calls to protect their own children, many of them refused to let the families even speak on legislation to reduce gun violence in the state of Texas. So, some of these families resorted to political means. Some of the parents endorsed Beto O'Rourke. They made political ads for his campaign to try to replace Governor Abbott with a more gun restrictive candidate. Ultimately, that proved unsuccessful, but their pressure from the families, from young people, did result in one of the most substantial pieces of legislation in the country getting passed on this issue on a bipartisan level at the national level with the support and the stewardship of Senator Chris Murphy and John Cornyn. The Safer Communities Act invested millions of dollars federally in mental health services for community violence prevention, increased protections for victims of domestic violence, established enhanced background checks for buyers under 21, and provided incentives for states to implement red flag laws and extreme risk protection orders, two action steps that states can take to prevent people who should not be owning guns from getting them. So, although this is a substantial piece of legislation, there was a lot that was left out of this package, a lot that still needs to be done at the federal level if we're actually going to make a substantial amount of change on this issue long term. Emma, what do you think are the missing pieces here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously it was a substantial piece of legislation, like you said, but there's so much more that can and should be done. Um, I mean, well, unrealistic right now. I think we have to look, in the future about renewing the weapons ban and strengthening the ban on assault rifles and high capacity magazines to reduce these mass shootings. I mean, if we see people arguing about the Second Amendment, we have to realize that the Second Amendment was ratified almost 240 years ago. That was when we did not have these high capacity magazines. So I think it is, you know, our every right to ban these assault rifles. And while, I think we need to be realistic now, and I think, it would not have been passed under this act. I think that that's an avenue that we should explore because if we think about it, why if people want to argue that they want to protect themselves, right? That they're in a rural area and the police are not nearby and so they need to protect themselves. Okay, that's fine. Why do you need a gun that is stronger and, you know, more lethal than the guns that the regular police officers have? The handguns, right? So why would we have a private citizen owning a gun that is stronger and more lethal than what a regular police officer has? And so that's something I think we need to explore. Um, I think we also have to invest in our communities' gun violence programs or, violence prevention programs by allocating funds for evidence-based violence prevention programs aimed to addressing the root causes of gun violence in communities. And I think we also have to look at gun violence as a twofold issue, right? You can't have gun violence without the guns, but you also can't have gun violence without the mental health crisis. And I think that Republicans tend to just focus on the mental health. And the reality is, you are not going to have these shootings if these people in mental health crises do not have the access to get these guns. So it's a twofold issue. Yes, it is a mental health issue, but it wouldn't be a problem if they did not have the direct access to these guns. And so I think along those lines, we could, again, strengthen background checks. Also, closing the Charleston loophole and enacting legislation to extend the waiting period for background checks to ensure that all necessary information is properly reviewed before a firearm is sold. And so while I do concede to the Republicans' argument that yes, mental health is a component of gun violence, it would not be an issue if they did not have access to these guns so readily and so easily. And so I think we need to address the mental health component, but we also need to be realistic in that you cannot always address mental health, and we need to make sure that these people who are in these times of crises do not have access to these guns that can kill many, many people in such a short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Another argument that Republicans often make is that the federal government is limited ultimately in their ability to enact laws at all regarding guns. And this makes the onus on fallen state legislators to enact gun safety legislation. Some states, like Michigan and Massachusetts, whose populations elected Democratic majorities and Democratic trifectas in their state governments, have since enacted stronger policies to tackle the gun violence epidemic in the United States. Meanwhile, states like Texas are continuing to move in the other direction, loosening gun laws and kind of disregarding the impact made on families by these mass shootings. But something that's interesting that I saw recently was that the state of Tennessee is taking a more conservative approach to trying to solve some part of this problem by allowing teachers in school to carry guns in the classroom. So Emma, I'm wondering what you think about this approach, and if you think that enacting stronger gun laws that actually restrict people's abilities to take to own guns if they're deemed unfit for that, if that's going to fall only on Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an absolute joke that we're arming teachers with guns. I can, you know, count many teachers on my hands that I would be scared to have a gun at school. And also, the onus shouldn't be on the teacher to protect the students. Why are we assuming that there is going to be a shooting at the school instead of protecting the school from a shooting in the first place? Why are we preemptively assuming that there's going to be a shooting, so we need to arm the teachers instead of saying, why don't we just be proactive about it and prevent these shootings from happening in the first place? Because the reality is, even if we arm a teacher and even if they have the gun, what is the likelihood that they're going to be able to protect their students? They have to keep the students calm. They have to make sure the students are in the right place. We can't just solve the issue after the fact. We need to be proactive about it and look toward other means of, solving gun violence rather than saying, we need more guns to, you know, mitigate the impacts of all the guns on the streets. And sadly, I don't like to vote party line. I like to vote the candidate, but sadly, because of the increasingly polarized environment that we're in right now, we see very few Republican candidates who are willing to stand up for students and stand up for kids and stand up for people's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Um, and so, I mean, the reality is that these Republicans who would be willing to stand up to, the gun lobby and the NRA are simply not electable because their electorate won't vote for them. And so right now, I think, I do agree that we need to elect Democrats who will enact these policies to prevent these issues from happening in the first place and not saying, okay, we're just going to arm these teachers who, one, could be insane themselves, and two, shouldn't have to protect their students after the fact. We at the national level and the state level should protect the students. It shouldn't be on the onus of the teachers. And so, yeah, just in short, I say we need to register more voters and we need to encourage them to vote blue because right now, the Democrats are the only people who are willing to realistically propose a realistic solution to this problem.
What are your thoughts on doors? Do you think that those are the problem, as Ted Cruz
So can
says?
you, yeah, I mean, why don't we just give them, bulletproof backpacks? And instead of giving Ted Cruz security, why don't we just give him a bulletproof backpack? Because if kids don't need security, if kids don't need to feel safe, if bulletproof backpacks and doors works for kids, should work for Ted Cruz as well.
Well said. Well said. Um, and as we know, this crisis of gun violence is pretty unique to the United States. Not necessarily in terms of numbers, but in terms of the amount of gun deaths per capita with regard to our country being a developed nation. You know, I live right now in France, and you feel the difference going into a public space. You don't feel scared that someone's going to commit an act of that might seem like unconscionable because I'm in a country right now with strong gun laws that does not let people who are mentally unstable, who are too young, who should not be having a gun or having access to a gun to own one. It feels, it feels different. It feels safer. And I think sometimes we can be in the US, we can be acclimated to the fact that we have to watch our back in school, that we have to, look for the exits in a shopping mall. but it feels different here, and we have to notice that. But the crisis in the US right now with gun violence is also spilling out of our own borders. Right now, the guns that are available in the US are fueling gang violence across Latin America and South America. That is fueling migration to the United States, something that the Republicans often talk about as their main issue in this critical election year. So I guess I'm wondering, to bring it kind of full circle here, how can we make the fact that Republicans, perhaps unintentionally, are politically benefiting from loose gun laws in the United States because they're fueling immigration to the United States that Republicans are able to use as a political issue going into this election year?
It's interesting how that ties into gun violence as well, and you know, how it's not just an American issue now because of America and because of the culture in America, it's spilling into other borders. And, you know, I mean, in terms of holding them accountable, I think we have to elect them, vote them out. And I think, again, that starts with registering more voters. And I think that obviously we can't have you don't want to vote on just based on one issue. But the problem is there are so many issues that the Republicans are failing on right now. We see Roe v. Wade, right? Where either women didn't come out to vote for Hillary Clinton or they just protested voting. And then Trump got elected, and then it resulted in Roe v. Wade being overturned. And the problem with that is that in 2016, I couldn't vote in 2016. Well, I'm going to be impacted by that decision, by that election for essentially my whole life, or until, you know, some of these Supreme Court, very conservative Supreme Court justices leave the bench. Um, so just to, you know, kind of shorten what I was saying, I think that we need to come together as youth and realize that, while certain Democratic candidates may not be perfect, while Biden might not be perfect. Well, the person running for Senate, the Democratic person running for your senator or governor may not be perfect. If you look at it in a net whole, Biden versus Trump, your Democratic senator versus a Republican senator, what issues are most important to you? Roe v. Wade, gun violence, many other issues. And I think that we need to understand that no one is perfect, but that we need to rise above that and say we can't protest to vote. We need to vote. We need to come out strong. And if you don't vote at all, you're voting for Trump. We have to come out, support Biden, because if you don't, Trump will win. And that's something that sends shivers down my spine. But if you do not come out to vote and you protest voting for Biden because you don't agree with some of his policies, Trump is going to win. Gun violence is going to get worse. Women's rights are going to be restricted. Um, there's going to be more anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Trump is not good for either side. And so I think we need to rise above that and realize that while you might not agree with some of Biden's policies, we have to rise above that and vote for Biden so that we can protect a woman's right to choose, so that we can mitigate the issues of gun violence, and so that, we have a more accepting society.
I mean, I think he should hire you on that staff. I mean, that was the most concise message I think I've heard so far this cycle for Biden. So good job. And
Pretty
just,
long-winded, but I tried my
say where
best.
I stand on this. If I hear a young person say that they don't want to vote in this election, I say a similar thing, but I say, you're never going to find a candidate that you agree with 100% of the time unless you run yourself someday, which you should do. But this election, as all elections are where you're not running, is a choice between binary options. And this year, the options could not be more far apart. So on one side, we have someone who's going to protect democracy. We have someone who's going to protect a woman's right to choose. We have someone who's going to fight for climate justice. And on the other side, you have someone who's going to tear down institutions and not give room for anyone to be heard who is not a straight white man who has a lot of money. But with all these crises, all the rollbacks on rights that young people are having to witness every day, and with acts of violence and mass shootings, often it can be easy for young people who have not known any other political system than the one we have right now to feel not hopeful, to feel depressed about politics, and kind of check out from our system entirely. Emma, how do you motivate other young people to fight for the causes that they care about? How do you register young people who might feel not heard or not seen by our politicians or our political system? And how do you motivate our generation to contribute to politics this year when it could not matter more?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's, you know, scary to think about, right? We have so many people voting in our country. How does one vote matter? How does your vote matter? And I think a lot of people struggle with that, saying that, I don't necessarily agree with this politician, but I want him to win. I just can't bring myself to voting for them. And I think that's a problem because I think every vote matters. And I think that's the message that I've really been trying to spread with the youth that and people in general that your vote matters. And we saw it in 2016. If you're complacent and you're protesting someone, we saw, you know, when Hillary Clinton was running against Trump, we saw some of the Bernie Sanders supporters protesting Hillary Clinton because they didn't necessarily agree with her politics and her ideology. And that's completely fair. But then we got Trump. And I think most of those people can agree that Trump was the biggest mistake in the history of the United States of America. And so I think we need to rise above, trying to get the perfect candidate. I think we need to look at it at a net whole, and we can't say that my your vote doesn't matter, my vote doesn't matter, because every single vote matters. It's kind of the idea of picking up a penny. If you pick up 1 penny a day, you're going to be rich by the time you die, right? Every vote adds up, and you can't just say, I'm not going to vote. I want this person to win. I can't bring myself to vote for them, though, or I'm too busy to vote, because these issues are going to impact us for the rest of our lives. We have gun violence, we have Roe v. Wade, and we can't let another Trump happen again. And, I know I keep talking about the presidential election, but really a lot of the politics come at the state level, right? We have a very limited federal government, and we have, according to the 10th Amendment, what's not specifically stated in the Constitution goes back to the states. And so while I'm focusing on the presidential election, state elections matter probably even more. And so we need to not only rally behind these candidates, not only realize that they're human beings, that they're not perfect. We need to rise above that and say, on a net whole, zooming out, who is going to be better for our country? Even if there's one small issue with them, who is going to be a better for our country? And we need to motivate people to vote because their vote matters. And really just give the example of 2016 about, people protested the vote, and some states were, a margin of 10,000 votes. And that's 10,000 people who might have said, okay, other people are going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And so we don't want Trump to win. We just can't bring ourselves to vote for her. Your vote matters because it could be a small margin like that. So get out and vote, register to vote because your vote matters. And I think that's the message I want to send to people in the United States.
Anywhere that people in our audience can go to support your work.
Yeah, visit our TikTok, visit our Instagram, Gen Z Crusade. Reach out to us on our website if you want to get involved. We'd love to have you. This is an important issue, it's an important effort, and I think that we'd love to have you.
All right. Thanks. This has been Pod Save the Youth. See you next week.